The Pacific Theatre of War is represented in Battlefield 5 through two maps that we currently have access to, Iwo Jima and Pacific Storm. We will soon get Wake Island, a map that is reimagined in Battlefield 5, and we've seen it in plenty of previous Battlefield games. In this video I'm going to look through these maps in real life, linking in photographs from the modern day and historically, bringing up the same areas that DICE have tried to capture in the game. One thing I will say from the start is that DICE have clearly opted to bring in some similarities, but the scale is not the same. For the Marshall Islands, or Pacific Storm as it's known in Battlefield 5, I believe they have moved the islands closer together in order to create a more suitable battlefield. During the video I'll also drop in some historical background and information, as I think it's really important to understand the significance of these two areas. So starting out with Iwo Jima. DICE have done a great job recreating the black sands, rocky terrain and cave networks on Iwo Jima. You can really experience this in several game modes, however Breakthrough is certainly the best in terms of the more historically accurate push up the beach. Iwo Jima is closed to all civilians for visitation in real life. No one lives there either. You will find a naval base though, and can, as far as I know, visit about once a year with a guided tour. The reason behind this might be related to the fact that the thing is a naval base, but also Japanese culture is very respectful towards Mount Suribachi and areas that have seen battle and a large loss of life. As for the historical accuracy behind this map on Battlefield 5, the scale is certainly different, but the way that you push up those black sands with Mount Suribachi on your left hand side, moving your way up through the trails into the cave network, is certainly what you may have experienced back in the war, albeit not in the same sort of pace that you get in a Battlefield game. The Battle of Iwo Jima lasted from the 19th of February 1945 to the 26th of March 1945, so just over 30 days. This was a major battle in which the United States Marine Corps and Navy landed on and eventually captured the island of Iwo Jima from the Imperial Japanese Army during the Second World War. The American invasion, designated Operation Detachment, had the goal of capturing the entire island, including 3 Japanese-controlled airfields, to provide a staging area for attacks on the Japanese main islands. This 5-week battle comprised some of the fiercest and bloodiest fighting of the Pacific War in World War II. After the heavy losses incurred in the battle, the strategic value of the island became controversial. It was useless to the US Army as a staging base and useless to the US Navy as a fleet base. The landing strips were however rebuilt and used as emergency landing strips. The Imperial Japanese Army had very secure positions on the island and were heavily fortified with a dense network of bunkers, hidden artillery positions and 18 kilometres of tunnels. The American ground forces were supported by extensive naval artillery and had complete air supremacy provided by the US Navy and Marine Corps aviators throughout the entire battle. This can again be seen in Battlefield 5, with a lot of air combat present on the map, albeit some of it a bit too extensive when it comes to air to ground, but the cave networks and everything can be seen and experienced on Battlefield 5. Japanese combat deaths numbered 3 times the number of American deaths, although uniquely among the Pacific War Marine battles, American total casualties exceeded those of the Japanese. This is of course including dead and wounded. Of the 21,000 Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima at the beginning of the battle, only 216 were taken prisoner, some of whom were captured because they had been knocked unconscious or otherwise disabled. The majority of the remainder were killed in action, although it has been estimated that as many as 3,000 continued to resist within the various cave systems for many days afterwards, eventually succumbing to their injuries or surrendering weeks later. Despite the bloody fighting and severe casualties on both sides, the American victory was assured from the start. Overwhelming American superiority in numbers and arms, as well as complete air supremacy, coupled with the impossibility of Japanese retreat or reinforcement, along with sparse food and supplies, permitted no plausible circumstances in which the Americans could have lost the battle. Perhaps the most iconic photograph from World War II, and certainly from the US perspective of the Pacific campaign, Joe Rosenthal's Associated Press photograph of the raising of the US flag on top of the 169 metre Mount Suribachi by 6 US Marines became an iconic image of the battle and the American war effort in the Pacific. Iwo Jima, in my opinion, is one of the best maps in Battlefield 5 and is probably one of the most iconic maps in the Battlefield series. We've seen it in previous games, however Battlefield 5 does the best job in my opinion bringing that, I don't want to say realism, but immersion in some cases to the game. You will see also planes flying above you and battles to the side of you as soldiers rush up the beach. This is of course to bring a little more theatre and cinematic gameplay to Battlefield 5. Moving on to Pacific Storm. The Marshall Islands are a sprawling chain of volcanic islands and coral atolls in the central Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and the Philippines. In the northwest, Bikini Atoll's largely undisturbed waters, used as a ship graveyard after World War II, are now a popular wreck dive site. The whole area is teeming with marine life, and the various coral reefs have been replicated in Battlefield 5 around these islands. On Pacific Storm, you can see things such as sharks, turtles, and a variety of different water life around the islands, which is really interesting. You never know, there might be something a little larger out at sea. The Gilbert and Marshall Islands campaign were a series of battles fought from November 1943 through to February 1944 in the Pacific theatre of World War II between the US and Japan. They were the first steps of the drive across the Central Pacific by the US Pacific Fleet and Marine Corps, the purpose of which was to establish airfields and naval bases that would allow air and naval support for the upcoming operations across the Central Pacific. There were a few campaigns and it's been quite difficult to work out exactly where DICE have focused this. I personally believe it's operations Flintlock and Catchpole, which were aimed at capturing Japanese bases in the Marshall Islands, and I think this is where they have focused that Pacific Storm map. Of course, they have taken inspiration from Paracel Storm in Battlefield 4, meaning it might not be as geographically accurate as Iwo Jima, but it certainly does have that same feel. The Marshall Islands are located approximately 220 miles northwest of the Gilbert Islands and have been occupied by the Japanese since the First World War as part of the South Pacific Mandate. The Japanese regarded the islands as a very important outpost for their navy, and this was part of the reason why the US wanted to take them. In the Gilberts, the Americans emerged victorious, but were caught unprepared, suffering nearly 2,500 dead and over 2,000 wounded. Japan suffered a total of 5,085 dead and 247 captured. It was gruesome, with very tricky fighting conditions and both sides struggling. The Marshall Islands, by contrast, were a much easier landing. The Americans used the lessons learned in Tarawa by outnumbering the enemy defenders nearly 6-1 with heavier firepower, including armour-piercing shells, after the islands took nearly a month of heavy air and naval bombardment. In the Marshalls, the Americans lost 611 men, suffering 2,341 wounded and 260 missing, while the Japanese lost over 11,000 men and had 358 captured. After the Gilberts and Marshalls were taken, the Allies built naval bases, fortifications and airfields on the islands to prepare for an assault on the Marianas. A short story to finish this video off, taken from an article that is linked down below in the description. It revolves around rising sea levels, climate change, and a harsh reality that is being uncovered. In today's society, I think this is even more relevant than before. Rising sea levels have washed the remains of at least 26 Japanese World War II soldiers from their graves. The Foreign Minister of the Marshall Islands said on Friday, "There are coffins and dead people being washed away from graves. It's that serious." It's not something I really want to get into, to be honest, on this channel with climate change and rising sea levels. Everyone has their own opinion, but the way that it's interacting with history is fairly interesting. Not only do you have the plane wrecks that you've seen throughout this video in the photographs, and nature almost taking back over what we've done in the past, but these things that have happened and really been covered up, such as fallen soldiers being covered and then left for decades, then only to be uncovered by nature again, is very interesting. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like down below and a comment. As I mentioned, Wake Island is coming to Battlefield 5 soon. That one would be fairly simple to do a comparison on, Wake Island being so popular and well known, especially in the Battlefield franchise. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.